In 1973, a woman in Nevada found a pocket of turquoise on a picnic. The whole deposit was small enough that you could have covered it with a hat. About 100 pounds came out of the ground before it was completely finished, and that was 50 years ago. Today, that material trades at figures like $300 a carat, which works out to $1,500 a gram, which is several times the price of gold. It is turquoise. It is a stone people associate with gift shops, and it costs more by weight than most of what is in a jewelry store window, for one reason only. There is a fixed number of it in the world, and that number will never change again. 15 gemstones. Every one of them comes from a source that is finished, and every one of them is worth more today than when the digging was still going on. But I am not going to count them down, because a countdown would hide the only thing here that is actually useful. Mines do not all die the same way, and the way a mine dies decides the shape of the price curve afterwards. That sounds like a small distinction. It is worth a fortune, because a mine that closes on an announced date does something completely different to prices than a mine that floods overnight, and both do something different again to a mine that simply stopped being worth the diesel. If you can tell which kind of death you are looking at, you can tell whether the money has already been made or whether it is still coming. So there are 5 ways a mine dies, 3 stones under each, and by the end you will be able to answer the question everybody asks about this subject and almost nobody answers properly, which is whether you buy before the door shuts or after. The first death, economics. These are the mines where the gemstone was never the point. Somebody was digging for metal, the beautiful thing came up alongside it, and the day the metal stopped paying, the beautiful thing stopped coming out too. Tsumeb in northern Namibia is the greatest example on Earth. It was a copper and lead mine, and it happens to be, by broad agreement, one of the most spectacular mineralogical occurrences ever found anywhere. Tsumeb sets the benchmark for azurite, for cerussite, for dioptase, for mimetite, for smithsonite, minerals that anchor major public and private collections all over the world. From the 1980s, the reserves dwindled and metal prices fell, and in 1996, the mine closed permanently. Exceptional Tsumeb azurite or dioptase now commands prices in the tens of thousands of dollars, and even modest pieces run into the hundreds or thousands. Nobody will ever dig another one, because nobody is going to reopen a copper mine to look for crystals. Bisbee turquoise is the same story with a better anecdote. Bisbee, Arizona, was a copper operation, the lavender pit, and the turquoise that came up in it was so good it got its own name, Bisbee blue, a hard, deep blue with a distinctive chocolate-brown matrix running through it. It was not a product. It was in the way. The company discarded it, and until 1972, miners were actually prohibited from carrying it out at all, on liability grounds, so they smuggled it. The material that exists today largely left that pit in somebody's lunchbox, against the rules, because the men underground could see what the company could not. Mining in the lavender pit stopped in 1974, and the whole operation ceased the following year when the copper price collapsed, and no turquoise has come out since. Which means every piece of genuine Bisbee blue in the world is material somebody pocketed 50 years ago and took home in a lunch pail. Yogo sapphire in Montana is the version where the economics never worked at all. The sapphires sit in a narrow, igneous dike. They come out a naturally even cornflower blue that needs no heating whatsoever, which is rare anywhere in the world, and the deposit has defeated one commercial operator after another because getting them out costs more than they reliably return. Yogo has opened and closed repeatedly across a century. That is the economic death, and here is the price behavior that goes with it. Slow, steady, decades of quiet appreciation with no drama, because there was never an announcement, no news cycle, and no moment where the market woke up. You are not late to these. You were never invited, and there is something structural about this category that people miss, which is that these mines can never come back. Not, will not, cannot. A copper mine reopens when the copper price justifies it, and nobody has ever reopened a copper mine because collectors wanted azurite. Because the crystals are worth a fraction of a percent of the operating cost. So the gemstone supply is hostage to a metal market that does not know it exists and would not care if it did. Tsumeb will reopen the day copper makes it worth reopening, and if that ever happens, the modern extraction. Methods that would be used are the kind that destroy delicate crystals rather than recover them. That is the quiet tragedy of the byproduct mine. Even the reopening would not bring the stones back. The second death, accident. These are the mines that were producing well, expected to keep producing, and then stopped in a single day for a reason nobody planned. The Mir mine in Yakutia is the modern case, and it is genuinely sobering. Mir was found in 1955, and the open pit became one of the largest holes ever dug by human beings. More than a kilometer across and over 500 meters deep, sitting on the edge of a town built to serve it. When the pit reached its limit, they went underground beneath it. In August of 2017, water poured from the flooded open pit above into the underground workings, and 8 people were killed. The mine, which had been producing around 9% of the output of Alrosa, one of the largest diamond producers on the planet, stopped that day. It is still stopped. There is now a proposal to develop reserves far below the accident zone, hundreds of meters deeper, with a decision expected around now. And if it happens, it will be one of the most expensive mining projects in the world. Kimberley is the historical version. The big hole in South Africa was hand-dug by tens of thousands of men in the diamond rush, and it closed in 1914. There is nothing to reopen. It is a tourist attraction with water at the bottom, and Chivor in Colombia is the strangest accident on this list, because it did not collapse or flood. It was lost. The Spanish worked it through the 16th and 17th centuries, and then in 1672 the mine was ordered closed by royal decree, at the insistence of Pope Clement X, to stop the treatment of the indigenous people forced to work it. And then the jungle took it. Not partly, completely. The location passed out of human knowledge for more than 200 years. What brought it back is one of my favorite stories in this entire subject. In the late 1880s, a Colombian mining engineer named Francisco Restrepo went into the National Library looking for legends about the lost mines, and found the account of a friar, Pedro Simon, which had sat unread for the better part of 2 centuries. He took the friar's descriptions of the landscape, and he walked the eastern Andes for roughly 8 years, comparing what he saw to what he had read. He found it in 1896, and almost immediately uncovered old mine terraces and the remains of Spanish aqueducts. Emeralds had been sitting in that ground the entire time. Nobody could find the door. And in 1920, from that reopened mine, came the Patricia, 632 carats, the largest raw emerald ever found. Accident deaths behave in the opposite way to economic ones. The price moves after, sharply, because nobody had time to position beforehand. There is no announcement to trade on. The supply simply is not there on Monday, and everybody finds out at once. And there is a second effect that takes longer and is larger. When a producing mine stops without warning, everything already in circulation from that source becomes, overnight, the entire remaining supply, including material that was sitting in dealer inventory being sold as ordinary goods the week before. Nothing about those stones changed. Their status changed. That is the single most reliable pattern in this entire subject, and it is why the people who do well out of accident closures are almost never speculators. They are people who already owned the thing for other reasons and simply did not sell. The third death, the calendar, and this is the one that matters most for what you do with your money, because these are the mines that told the world in advance exactly when they were going to stop. Argyll, in the remote north of Western Australia, is the defining case in modern gem history. It began operating in the 1980s, and it produced something in the order of 865 million carats of rough diamonds across its life, most of it commercial brown material. But it was also, by a very long way, the world's source of pink diamonds, producing over 90% of global supply, along with the far rarer reds and violets. And then Rio Tinto said, publicly and years ahead, that the ore body was running out and the mine would close. The last day of mining was the 3rd of November 2020, after 37 years. Now watch the numbers, because this is the lesson. The Fancy Color Research Foundation put the rise in pink diamond values at 116% between 2010 and 2020. That is the decade before the closure. Tender prices rose several 100% across roughly 2 decades. The buying happened in advance by people who could read a press release. And then the tender held the year after closing set records anyway. I want to sit on the Argyll numbers for a moment, because the irony in them is instructive. 865 million carats came out of that mine, and the overwhelming majority of it was small, brown and champagne material that the industry had to invent a marketing vocabulary for in order to sell at all. Argyll was, by volume, a mine that produced diamonds nobody especially wanted. The pinks were a rounding error inside the output, and the rounding error is the entire reason anybody remembers the name, because when the mine closed, it took 90% of the world's supply of a color with it, and there is no second Argyll anywhere on the geological map. Rio Tinto did not sell those pinks the way diamonds are normally sold either. They ran an annual tender, a sealed bid auction of a few dozen stones, which meant the price discovery happened in public once a year, in front of everyone. That mechanism is why the run-up was so visible and so long. The market had an annual scoreboard telling it exactly how fast the thing it could no longer buy was appreciating. Tanzanite is the calendar death in slow motion, happening right now in public. Tanzanite exists in exactly one place on Earth, a strip of roughly 14 square kilometers in the Merelani Hills at the foot of Kilimanjaro. Not one country, one hillside. Estimates of how long it lasts vary a great deal, and I am going to give you the spread honestly rather than the scariest number. Some in the trade say 10 years. Tanzania's chief government geologist estimated in 2018 that reserves might last 20 to 30 years at then current extraction rates. Broader assessments put commercially viable extraction somewhere inside 20 to 50 years. What nobody disputes is that there is no second deposit, that decades of exploration have not found one, and that geologists consider another find extremely unlikely. So this is a stone with a published expiry date and a market that has not fully priced it. Diavik in the Canadian Arctic is the third, and it is the freshest example on this entire list because it just happened. Rio Tinto announced the end date years in advance, and in March of this year, Diavik delivered its final production. After 23 years and more than 150 million carats, having simply exhausted its economic reserves. The mine is now in decommissioning, with closure activities running to 2029. The last of its rough is being cut and sold through this year and beyond, which means there is a finite and now fixed quantity of Canadian Arctic diamond entering the market and then never again. Same pattern as Argyll, same public countdown happening in front of us right now rather than in a documentary. Calendar deaths spike before the door shuts because the information is free and the date is known. If you are waiting for a calendar mine to close before you act, you are the exit liquidity for the people who read the announcement. Quick thing before the last two, and it takes 10 seconds. If the 5 deaths idea is useful to you, hit the like button, because that is genuinely what decides whether this reaches somebody who is about to sell a stone they do not understand. And subscribe if you want the rest of these, because I do this for one category at a time, and there is a great deal more where this came from. Right? The 4th death. History, war, revolution, sanctions, and the slow strangulation of a supply chain by politics rather than geology. The stone is still in the ground. You just cannot get it. Mogok in Myanmar is the ruby version. The valley has produced the finest rubies on earth for centuries, the material the trade calls pigeon's blood, and the single clearest demonstration of what that name is worth is the Sunrise Ruby, just under 26 carats, which sold at Sotheby's Geneva in 2015 for around $30 million, which works out at over $1 million per carat. What has interrupted Mogok is not the deposit. It is decades of conflict, instability, and international trade restrictions that have at various points made legal export difficult or impossible. Supply arrives in bursts and then stops, and the price behaves accordingly. Hetian jade is the Chinese version, and the numbers are astonishing. For over 2,000 years, white nephrite has been collected as river pebbles from the Urumqi and Karakash rivers in Xinjiang. And the finest grade, a translucent warm white the Chinese call mutton fat, is among the most prized materials in the entire Chinese art market. By 2006, there were reportedly more than 8,000 excavating machines and 50,000 people working those riverbeds. That is not mining. That is a stampede. The riverbed material is now produced in a fraction of historical quantities. Environmental protections have tightened, and top-grade rough trades in the thousands of dollars per kilogram in the domestic market. The rivers are still there. What ran out is what was in them. And Panjshir in Afghanistan is the third. Emeralds of genuinely fine quality coming out of a valley whose access has been governed by conflict for 2 generations rather than by geology. Political deaths do not produce a clean curve. They oscillate. Prices spike when supply is cut and sag when a route reopens. And the honest answer is that timing these is speculation rather than analysis. What is not speculation is that political closures raise the value of old, documented, already exported material, because a stone that is already out and already papered is not subject to any of it, the 5th death. And this is the one people misunderstand most completely. There was never enough there to run out of. These are not mines that closed. These are deposits that were so small, the finding and the finishing were almost the same event. Lander blue turquoise is the perfect illustration. It was found in 1973 in Nevada by a woman named Rita Hapgood on a picnic with her sisters. The deposit was what miners call a hat mine, meaning it was small enough that you could cover the whole thing with a hat. About 100 pounds of material came out before it was completely gone. And that was the 1970s. 100 pounds for all time, for the entire world. Fine Lander blue spiderweb turquoise trades at figures like $300 a carat, which is $1,500 a gram, which puts it in the conversation with precious metals and past a great many gemstones. There are no running veins and no adjacent zones to chase. When it was gone in the same afternoon it was understood. Painite is the same thing at the far end of the scale. It was for years listed by Guinness World Records as the rarest mineral on Earth, and until the early 2000s fewer than a dozen crystals were known to exist anywhere. Since then, More have been found in the Mogok region and in Kachin State, and current estimates put the total number of known specimens worldwide at around 1,000. 1,000 of everything, ever. Low-grade material starts around $100 to $1,000 a carat, and the finest cut stones over a carat reach $50 to $100,000 a carat. Larimar closes the group, a soft blue pectolite found on one mountainside in the Dominican Republic and nowhere else on the planet. It is inexpensive today, which is exactly why I am including it, because it is the only stone on this list where the single source story has not yet been priced in. This fifth death does not have a curve at all, because there was never a supply shock to react to. There was never any supply. The price of these things simply does not fall, ever, and it drifts upward whenever a collector who owns one dies and it comes back to the market. So let us answer the question the whole subject is built on. Do you buy before the mine closes or after? And now you can see that it is the wrong question, because it depends entirely on which death you are looking at. If it is a calendar death, an announced closure with a date, you buy before, and if you are reading about it after the fact, the move has already happened and you are paying for somebody else's foresight. Argyle proved that twice, once on the way down and once on the way out. If it is an accident death, you buy after, because nobody had the chance to buy before, and the market spends years absorbing what happened. If it is an economic death, timing does not matter much at all, because the curve is slow and long, and there is no event to be early or late to. If it is a political death, do not try to time it, and buy documented material that is already out of the country. And if it is the fifth kind, the deposit that was never big enough to close, then timing is irrelevant, because you are not buying a supply story. You are buying a fixed number of objects that will exist forever and never increase. And here is the last thing, which is the practical part. Every single one of these stones is worth exactly what a laboratory report says it is worth, because origin is the entire proposition. A sapphire is a sapphire. A Yogo sapphire is a Yogo sapphire only if somebody with an X-ray fluorescence machine and a comparison collection says so. That is why auction catalogues print the mine name in capital letters, and it is why a single line on a report moves a price by a multiple rather than a percentage. So if you own something from any of these places, the sequence is always the same, and it is worth writing down. First, do nothing to it. Do not clean it. Do not polish it. Do not let anybody recut it. Do not have it reset. And above all, do not let anybody heat or treat it to improve the color, because every one of those operations either destroys evidence the laboratory needs or removes the exact characteristic the premium is paid for. Second, photograph it as it is, in the setting it is in, and photograph every mark on the metal, because provenance evidence lives on the mounting far more often than people expect, and an old repair or an old retailer's stamp can support an origin claim. Third, find out what the family story is while there is still somebody alive who knows it, because a documented chain of ownership going back before a mine closed is itself worth money, and it evaporates one funeral at a time. And only then, fourth, send it for an origin report, in that order. I have watched people do step 4 first and lose the answer, and I have watched people skip step 3 entirely and then spend years trying to reconstruct it from photographs. The report is the asset, and the stone is just what the report is about. But the story is what makes anybody believe the report belongs to that stone. Tell me in the comments which of the 5 deaths you found most surprising, and whether you would rather own something from a mine that closed on a schedule or one that closed overnight, because I think that choice says more about a person than they expect. I read everyone. And if there is a stone in your family that came out of a place that no longer exists, that is not an old rock in a drawer. That is a fixed and permanently limited edition, and nobody is printing more.